Hello learners, welcome to this course on preparation of research proposal in social sciences. I am Dr. Pratik Chaurasia, Assistant Professor, Faculty of Education, Banaras Hindu University. Today we are going to discuss our lecture number 32, which is based on defining the relevant sample in the proposal. We have discussed various aspects of sampling technique and defining your population, as well as we have discussed about identifying the relevant sample. But today we will discuss that how to define your relevant sample in the proposal. So let us discuss this one by one. Key learning themes for this lecture: why define the sample in research proposal, what is the need, what is a relevant sample, need for relevance in sampling, component to include in proposal, impact of sample definition, examples from educational research, ethical and practical consideration, and checklist for proposal writers. So let us discuss all this one by one. Why define the sample in research proposal? Very important that as a researcher, why it is very important to define sample in a research proposal, because sample is something which you are going to take up later on, but why it is required to be discussed is in a research proposal. So let us see here. It clarifies who the study investigates, very important, over whom you are going to execute all your plans, that has been mentioned with sample, and you are defining it in a research proposal. Align with research question, objective and hypothesis. Builds credibility and feasibility of the proposal. It aids reviewers in understanding the scope and applicability of finding. You can see clearly on the screen here that there are the four major aspects that why to define sample in a research proposal. And it is not only defining the sample in a research proposal. As a researcher, when you define your sample, you represent your understanding towards your research as well as sample. Means you are specifically defining that over whom you are going to conduct the study, over whom you are going to conduct the study. You clarifies that who will be studied in the investigation. Second is it align with research question, objective and hypothesis. Here it's a very significant thing that I have discussed previously also, but I am again highlighting it, that when you are defining certain sample in your research proposal, you are actually making a relationship between your research questions, objective and hypothesis. You are connecting all these three dots together to form something. Something means to collect data, to make interpretation. Therefore, it is very important for a researcher to define sample properly in a research proposal, and especially when you are applying for some certain fund, some certain grants, they will look very seriously into your sample definition, that what is your sample, what you are targeting and from whom you will obtain your data. So it is very important. Third is it builds credibility and feasibility of the proposal. As we know that research proposal is a formal scientific writing of a research problem addressing various components. So you can see here, whenever you define your sample properly, you builds the credibility and feasibility of the proposal, that yes, why my proposal is sound, why my proposal is a good research proposal, why it should be accepted, why grant should be given, because I have defined my sample and other components in a very systematic and logical manner, and ultimately it adds to your credibility and feasibility of the proposal, that yes, how you are going to conduct it and how you are going to produce something with your research. Last is it aids reviewers in understanding the scope and applicability of finding. Definitely, when somebody is looking into some research proposal and reading your proposal, they have this tentative idea about that aspect, that what you are going to do. It may be case that what your finding will come, we don't know, but whatever you are writing, that this is my population, this is my sample, and this is my objective of the study, then ultimately you are defining your scope, and as a reviewer people will see your scope and applicability of the findings directly with your sample definition, because over whom you are collecting is very important. So that is why it is very important and significant to define your sample properly in a research proposal. What is relevant sample? Now, it's a big question in front of a researcher, that we have identified population, we have identified sample also, but the question that always triggers into the minds of a researcher, that whatever sample I have selected, is it relevant? Relevant to research objective, relevant to demand of the research, relevant to the requirement of the research, intent of the research. So let us see. Relevance basically reflects the characteristics of target population. Is accessible within the available time and resource. Suits the research design, whether the research is qualitative, quantitative, or mixed type of research. So whether your sample suits the research design, then if it suits the research design, we consider it as a relevant sample. It aligns with ethical protocols, very important. You can see here on the screen that the 4 important aspects are there that combines together to make a sample relevant for some particular study. First is characteristics of the target population, second is accessible within available time and resource, and third, very important, that whatever sample you have selected, is it appropriate and suitable with respect to the research design that you are selecting in your study. And last is, it should align with ethical protocols. Let us consider one example here. For a study on inclusive practices in urban schools, a relevant sample must include the sample from urban school. Here it is very interesting and very important also to look into this concern of example. See what the example says here, that for a study on inclusive practices in urban school. Here one key component is urban school, that you have to see inclusive practices in urban schools. So it's a restriction also, and it's a focus, an aspect of a research, that whatever sample you collect here should primarily belongs to urban schools. Otherwise, it does not incline with the research objective. And sometime when you select sample, always remember, it is not a matter of right or wrong. It is not a matter of right or wrong. It's a matter of relevancy. It's a matter of appropriateness. It's a matter of suitability. Whether your selected sample is relevant to the intent of the research or not. Here intent means the research objective that you have defined. So you see here that if you are doing a study on inclusive practices in urban school, then definitely you have to select a sample from urban schools. This is how we make and establish the relevancy of the sample. Need for relevance in sampling. It's another important question, that why it is required that sample should be relevant, why we cannot take nearby sample. For example, when you define a population, definitely population has different subsets, and the moment you decide that I will choose this particular subset as a sample, then you should have a proper justification for not selecting the other subsets of the sample. Let us see here. First is, it ensures validity. Second, it supports generalizability. And third, it avoids sampling bias. All these things you can see is of very prime importance for considering a sample into a research, because whenever you are going for any kind of a sampling, whether it ensures the validity or not, it's a very important aspect of the research, whether it ensures the validity or not. And when you are going for a sampling, definitely you have some kind of aspect to generalize something, because it supports the generalizability. And last is avoid sampling bias. Any kind of a sample bias can be avoided by using appropriate sampling in a research. Let us take one example. When studying NEP 2020 challenge in classroom implementation, your sample should exclude policymakers and focus on teachers and students, those who are grassroots beneficiary. Here it is very important and very challenging to understand that what to include and what to exclude in a sampling. You can consider here example that NEP 2020 challenges in classroom implementation. Then definitely you are not going to ask it with the policymakers. You have to go and take the opinion, attitudes, and any kind of a feedbacks related to classroom implementation with those persons, those who are implementing it in a grassroots level, primary beneficiaries, teachers and student. So this is how you establish the relevancy, and this is why it is very important that you select a relevant sample in your research. Components to include in proposal: target population, sampling frame, sampling technique used, and sample size and justification. You can see here, first of all, you are going to include target population. Example, all secondary school students in rural Haryana. You are selecting the target population, the comprehensive aspects. Sample frame, a list of all students enrolled in government secondary school obtained from school board records. It's a list of your sample. That's why we put it in the sample frame. And the moment you define your sample frame or you have your sample frame, you are in a position to move forward for sampling technique. Example, multi-stage sampling to account for geographic diversity. Last is 300 students chosen through stratified random sampling based on gender and school type. Here it's a kind of an example that how you move in order to make your sample from target population to the exact sample numbers. So this is how it is suggested that you do and look into these components to put in the proposal. Impact of sample definition. This is interesting and important for a researcher to understand that what your impact will be there if you define your sample properly. Let us see one by one. It influences study reliability, data quality and interpretability. Very important. Second, determines statistical power in quantitative research. Third, shapes depth of understanding in qualitative research. Let us discuss with the help of an example here. If your sample for a study on online learning only includes urban students, finding cannot be generalized to rural learners. Here we have to understand this aspect, that if you have selected some certain population and you are selecting some sample out of it, definitely whatever data you have collected and analysis you have done, that results are not applicable to the other samples out of that population. Whatever you are defining, whatever you are doing in the form of a research is generalized to the concerned population or to the sample whatever you have selected. So you can see here that when you are doing any kind of a study which is based on urban students, that findings cannot be generalized to rural students, and that is why you have to define your sample in a research proposal, that this is my sample and I will select by this and this technique, and this is how I will move forward with my research, because it requires the reliability and data quality as well as interpretability, that how you will interpret the data obtained from some certain sample. That is important. So when you define your sample properly, you address these issues in a very concrete manner. And next is statistical power. How you will utilize the obtained data in terms of making meaningful inferences. That is important. That is why it determines your statistical power in a quantitative research, and it defines the depth of understanding in qualitative research, because here your intent is different. You do not specifically try to make generalization, but you try to inquire some certain aspect with the help of case study or another kind of a qualitative research design. So when you define your sampling, it gives a proper impact over the aspects, that yes, how you have covered it, how you have defined it, and how you are going to do it further. Example from educational research, let us see here. Let us see some study topic. First is gender bias in textbook. It's a kind of a just research problem that I have taken. Relevant sample, school teacher and curriculum designer. Justification, both groups engage with and construct textbook narratives. Here it is important to understand that you see, when you are selecting a topic related to gender bias in textbook, then basically who is going to utilize that book, who is going to spend more time with the book, who is going to be the primary beneficiary of the book, you can see school teachers and curriculum designers. Justification, both groups engage with and construct textbook narratives. Second is impact of peer tutoring in math. Relevant sample, grade 8 student from co-ed schools. Justification, age group and environment allow meaningful peer interactions. Next is emotional well-being in NEP. Relevant sample, parents, teachers, students of grade 6 to 8. Justification, NEP implementations begins from grade 6 onwards. This is how you see, whenever you are conducting any kind of a research, when you are trying to make some certain kinds of a generalization, you have to make a relationship between your relevant sample and what kind of sampling technique you have selected, and what will be the justification of selecting some certain kind of a sample. Ethical and practical considerations, very important, you can make a note of this also. Voluntary participation and proper consent. Whenever you are going for any kind of a sample selection, be very particular in terms of understanding the proper consent, because if you do not have proper consent, you are not actually allowed to collect data from some certain sample. Therefore, look into this aspect, that what is voluntary participation and proper consent of the sample. Next is ensure non-exploitative selection. This is very important. As a researcher, you are a human being also. You are a learned person, you are a responsible person, and a very crucial member of the society. So it is your prime responsibility as well as duty also, that you ensure non-exploitative selection. You have to be very fair and very kind while you are going for selecting your sample and collecting data from them. Consider logistical access, language barriers, and resource limitation. This is the most practical part of your this component, that whenever you are going to select a sample, please be very clear about logistical access. Be very clear whether you can reach that sample or not, and if you can reach the sample, what kind of a resources you will require, what kind of a resource limitation you have, language barrier you have. So you have to look into this all aspects also. Next is ensures the confidentiality of the subject selected as sample. Here it is very important to understand one thing, that you as a researcher, when you are doing any kind of research, you have a great sense of responsibility also. You have a great sense of responsibility because it may be case that when you are collecting any kind of a data from some certain sample, you may have diverse kind of data, because especially when you are doing qualitative research, you are asking something to the sample or subject, but you are getting something more of that. For example, if you are asking any question to a subject, that how do you feel with this and this things, there may be some responses which are not useful for you, but as a human being you obtained it in the record. So it is very important for a researcher that do not misuse any kind of a data, as well as ensures the confidentiality of the subject selected as sample. Do not disclose it to the public, because it's a great sense of responsibility when you conduct some research and go to the field and collect data. So do not misinterpret it, do not misuse it against the subject, do not become prejudiced towards any subject. Whatever data you have obtained, be very precise towards your objective, that I need to analysis only this and this aspects of the data. Remaining is, if not useful for you, leave it as it is. Do not misuse it, and makes the confidentiality of the subject as it is required. Last is use data obtained only for research purpose. This is also very important ethical concerns of the sampling aspects. Whenever you collect data, I am again repeating, whenever you collect the data, whether in quantitative, qualitative or mixed kind of a research, it may be case that you have got or received intentionally or unintentionally something more data, some more data from the subject, some more information from the subject. You have to make it confidential, as well as utilize this for only your research purpose. That is significant. Utilize it for your research purpose, not for any other kind of a personal benefits. Checklist for proposal writers, very important. You can make a note of this also, that whenever you are writing your proposal, these are the things that you have to do. First is the sample aligning with your research question? You have to see it very minutely, that whatever sample you have selected is aligning with your research question, what you are intending to find, what you are intending to inquire, whether your sample has been aligned with your research question or not. Second is, have you justified your sampling method? Most important, the way you are going to select your sample, that process, that technique should be justified within your research with the help of previous researches, review of literatures and different aspects of the research, that yes, why to use some certain kind of a sampling technique, why to use some certain kind of a sampling method. So these are the important things. Third is, have you explained why this sample is appropriate and why it was selected? Very crucial when you write your proposal, because the moment you miss this aspect, that why this sample is appropriate, it makes your sample vague, and the moment your sample becomes vague, you are moving towards the development of ineffective research proposal. Ineffective research proposal which might not be selected, or which might not catch the grants that you are willing to get it. So it is very important that please check that have you explained that why this sample is appropriate and why it was selected for your study. Next is, have you addressed limitations and impact of sample on finding? Very important component to be checked while you write your sampling in a proposal. Have you addressed the limitation and impact of sample on finding? There may be case that your samples and whatever you have selected may have some certain limitations and impact over sample, over findings. So look into these aspects and prepare your research proposal. Concluding discussion for this lecture, defining the relevant sample is not just procedural, it is central to the quality and clarity of your study. Very, very important. See, whenever you are selecting a relevant sample, you are not making it just a procedural. It is key, or you can say center to the quality and clarity of your study. And as a researcher, you have to understand these things, that when you are targeting some certain sample in a study, that is the thing, that is the component over which you are going to execute all other developed aspects. So if your sample is not properly selected, if not properly defined, not relevant to the study, nature of the study, demand of the study, then ultimately quality and clarity of your study will go down. And it may be case that your research will not be accepted, because what you claim in research objective, what you claim in research hypothesis may not be suitable, may not be useful for the sample that you have selected. So as a researcher, it is your prime responsibility and duty that make sure that whatever sample you have selected, it should be aligned with these things, as well as it should be understood in a more holistic manner, that how it serves the purpose of your research. Second is, be specific, be justificable, and connect the sample directly to research purpose. बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण, इन बातों का ध्यान आपको बड़े गौर से रखना है कि जो भी सैंपल आप सेलेक्ट कर रहे हैं, जो भी सैंपल आप सेलेक्ट कर रहे हैं अपने रिसर्च के लिए, वो आपके रिसर्च पर्पस से डायरेक्टली जुड़ा होना चाहिए। बहुत बार ऐसा होता है कि हमने जो शोध उद्देश्य बनाए या शोध परिकल्पनाएं जो बनाई, हमारा सैंपल उसके साथ अलाइन नहीं है। जो हम खोजना चाहते हैं, जिसकी हम जांच करना चाहते हैं, उन तथ्यों के आधार पर हमने सैंपल का सिलेक्शन नहीं किया जो हमारे रिसर्च ऑब्जेक्टिव की पूर्ति करें। इसलिए बतौर शोधार्थी ये बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण है कि हम इस बात का चिंतन करें और ध्यान रखें कि जो भी हम सैंपल सेलेक्ट कर रहे हैं, वो सैंपल डायरेक्टली रूप से हमारे रिसर्च पर्पस से अलाइन होना चाहिए। और अलाइन होने के साथ साथ आपके पास उसका एक प्रॉपर जस्टिफिकेशन होना चाहिए, दैट व्हाई दिस हैज बीन डन, क्यों यही किया गया, क्यों यही सैंपल लिया गया, क्यों यही तरीका अपनाया गया, बिकॉज आपके शोध की वही आवश्यकता थी। दैट रिसर्च हैज अ पर्टिकुलर डिमांड, एंड ऑन द बेसिस ऑफ डिमांड you have selected some certain kind of sample. Third is, a well-defined sample adds rigor and transparency to your proposal. Very, very important. When you have defined your sample properly, it is going to yield you a very fruitful products, because the moment you have selected your sample properly, it reflects the rigors and transparency also, that how much rigor you have done, how much energy you have put into the defining the sample as a researcher, because ultimately your findings are going to be linked with the sample that you have selected. And if you are going for a quantitative study and intending to generalize something, then well-defined sample will play a crucial role in terms of adding rigor, transparency, and ability to generalize, that how you are going to generalize your findings to some larger population or sample. So these are the things which are very, very important that the researcher has to keep in mind whenever defining your sample population and related aspects in a research proposal. So this is all from this lecture. Thank you so much.